They say grief comes in stages. What they don't tell you is how those stages collapse when the person you're mourning becomes a stranger after they're gone. My name is Elias Morgan. I'm 34 years old, and until 3 weeks ago, I was just another high school history teacher with a simple life. I wore the same style of button-down shirts, drove the same sedan I'd had since grad school, and came home every night to the same woman I'd loved for 12 years. I was predictable. Reliable. The kind of man who found comfort in routine and meaning in consistency. And then, on a perfectly ordinary Tuesday morning, my wife Mara didn't wake up. The doctors called it an aneurysm. These things can happen without warning, they said with practiced sympathy. She wouldn't have felt pain. As if that made it better somehow that the vibrant, laughing 32-year-old woman who had kissed me goodnight just hours before had simply stopped. No goodbye. No final words. Just silence where her heartbeat should have been. I remember standing in our bedroom that morning, the paramedics already gone, the house emptier than any space had a right to be. Her coffee mug was still on the nightstand, a perfect crescent of her lipstick on the rim. I couldn't bring myself to wash it. For days, it sat there, that last imprint of her, proof that she had existed, had been real, had been mine. The funeral was a blur of black suits and hushed voices. Her parents flew in from Arizona, hollow-eyed and grasping at me like I was the only solid thing left in their world. Her friends from the art center where she volunteered brought arrangements of wildflowers because Mara always said roses were for people without imagination. I nodded and thanked them, playing the role of grieving husband perfectly because that's exactly what I was. Until I wasn't just grieving. Until I became something else entirely. It started with a man I didn't recognize standing at the back of the funeral home. Tall, with the kind of confident posture that suggested he was used to being noticed. Dark hair swept back, expensive watch catching the light when he moved his hand to wipe at his eyes. He didn't approach the casket. Didn't sign the guest book. Just watched, his gaze never leaving Mara's photograph beside the spray of wildflowers. Who's that? I asked Sarah, Mara's best friend since college, nodding toward the stranger. Sarah followed my gaze, and something flashed across her face: recognition, followed by discomfort. Probably someone from the art center, she said too quickly, then squeezed my arm. I should check on your in-laws. And just like that, she was gone, leaving me with the first loose thread in what I thought was the seamless fabric of my marriage. I might have forgotten him. Might have filed him away as just another face in the crowd of my wife's expansive social circle. Mara had always been the butterfly to my bookworm, flitting from friend to friend, group to group, while I stayed rooted in my small, steady circle. It made sense that she knew people I didn't. But then came the day after the funeral, when the house emptied of casseroles and sympathy, and I finally forced myself to begin the unbearable task of packing away her things. Her winter coat was first a practical decision, since November in New England meant I needed the closet space for my own heavier jackets. I was folding it into a storage box when I felt something in the pocket. Not unusual for Mara, who was forever leaving tissues and lip balm and ticket stubs in her pockets. But this was heavier. A phone. Not her phone, that was already in the drawer of keepsakes I couldn't bear to get rid of. This was another phone entirely. Smaller, cheaper, with no case. Just a basic model that looked like something you'd buy if you needed a burner. I stared at it for a long moment, confused, before pressing the power button. It lit up without requiring a passcode, another difference from Mara's regular phone, which had been locked with my birthdate. And there they were. Messages. Dozens of them. All from someone saved only as a. Can't stop thinking about yesterday. The way you looked in that light, it's haunting me. Meet me tomorrow? Same place. I need to see you. I know it's complicated. But what we have is real, more real than anything. The timestamps told their own devastating story. The most recent was from the day before she died. I can't keep doing this halfway. I want all of you, not just the stolen hours. Tell him after the holidays. Start the new year honest. Start it with me. My hands went numb. The phone slipped from my fingers onto the soft folds of her coat, the screen still glowing accusingly up at me. The room seemed to tilt, the familiar walls of our bedroom, suddenly foreign and mocking. I found out she was cheating on me, at her funeral. The man at the back of the room. The one who couldn't approach her casket because he had no right to claim grief publicly. The one who had been waiting for my wife to leave me after the holidays. After 12 years together, after building a life and planning a future and believing in promises, she had been planning her exit all along. I sank to the floor beside her coat, the phone still open to messages from a man who had known parts of my wife I now realized I never had. The Mara I knew would never have deceived me this way. She was spontaneous, yes, sometimes restless, but fundamentally honest. Wasn't she? Had I been so absorbed in my routines, in my carefully constructed life, that I'd missed the woman she had become? Or had she always been this person, and I had simply been too trusting to see it? I scrolled through the messages, each one a knife twisting deeper. There were photos, too. Nothing explicit, but intimate in a way that was almost worse. Mara laughing in places I didn't recognize, her eyes alight with a joy I couldn't remember seeing recently. Mara in what looked like an artist's studio, surrounded by photographs. Mara with her head thrown back in abandonment, someone's hand, his hand, just visible at the edge of the frame. Hours passed as I sat there, piecing together a timeline of betrayal. The volunteer events that had kept her out later and later on weekends. The sudden interest in photography exhibitions. The new perfume she'd started wearing, not for me, never for me. The night she'd come home crying, talking about feeling unfulfilled. I had held her, promised we'd find new ways to bring meaning to her life, never suspecting that she'd already found what she was looking for in someone else's arms. The sun set, casting long shadows across the bedroom floor. I still hadn't moved from my spot beside her coat, the phone now dark in my hand. Grief had crystallized into something harder, something with edges sharp enough to cut. Not just the loss of Mara, but the loss of who I thought we were. The loss of our past, suddenly rewritten. The loss of the future I had been planning while she had been planning her escape. In the silence of the house that no longer felt like home, I made a decision. I would find him, this who had been the catalyst for my wife's deception. I would look into his eyes and understand what he had that had made 12 years of marriage seem so easily discardable. I would confront the truth, no matter how painful, because it had to be better than this limbo of half-knowledge and suspected betrayals. What I didn't know then was how deep the deception went. Or how the unraveling of my marriage would lead to the unraveling of everything I thought I knew about love, about Mara, and most of all, about myself. Because the man at the funeral was just the beginning. The phone was just the first clue. And the Mara Morgan that the world mourned wasn't the complete woman at all, she was a collection of carefully curated pieces, shown to different people at different times. I was about to meet all of her. Even the parts that would break what was left of my heart. The second phone became my unwanted companion in the days following the funeral. I would stare at it for hours, scrolling through messages that painted a picture of a Mara I never knew. The timestamps formed a timeline of deception stretching back nearly 4 months, beginning with innocent-sounding discussions about photography and gradually evolving into something far more personal. It was clear from the exchanges that their relationship had transformed from professional admiration to intimate connection around the 2-month mark, precisely when Mara had begun volunteering additional weekends at the Arts Center. Identifying A proved surprisingly simple. The photographs and the text messages featured distinct compositional styles, and a quick search of recent exhibitions at the local art center revealed Adrian Holt, a freelance photographer whose work had been showcased there during the exact time frame when Mara had suddenly developed her newfound passion for volunteering. His website displayed the same visual aesthetic I had seen in the images on the phone: moody lighting, unexpected angles, and an unmistakable intimacy with his subjects. Several featured silhouettes and partial profiles that, now looking closely, I recognized as my wife. "Elias, you need to eat something," Sarah insisted when she visited 3 days after the funeral, placing another casserole in my refrigerator alongside the untouched offerings from well-meaning neighbors. I wondered if she knew. The thought must have shown on my face because she paused, studying me with concern. "What's going on with you? This is more than grief." I retrieved the phone from my pocket and placed it on the kitchen counter between us. "Did you know about him?" The color drained from her face as she stared at the device. Elias, just tell me the truth. Everyone else has been lying to me. Sarah sank into a chair, shoulders slumping beneath an invisible weight. She made me promise not to say anything. She said it was temporary, that she was confused and needed to sort through her feelings. 4 months isn't temporary, Sarah. The night before she died, he asked her to leave me after the holidays. My voice remained steady despite the storm brewing inside me. Did she tell you that part of her plan? No, Sarah whispered, tears welling in her eyes. She only said she felt alive with him in ways she hadn't for years. I told her to talk to you, to try counseling before making any decisions. She reached across the table, her hand stopping short of touching mine. Elias, she did love you. Whatever happened with Adrian, it doesn't erase 12 years. But it did. Every memory now required re-examination, every moment of happiness questioned for its authenticity. The weekend trip she had begun canceling, the distant look in her eyes when I talked about our future, the new music playing from her studio that never quite seemed to match her previous tastes, all now revealed themselves as breadcrumbs along the trail of her departure. That evening after Sarah left, I found myself driving across town to Adrian's photography studio. The building sat nestled between a coffee shop and a bookstore, with large windows displaying artistic black and white portraits. I parked across the street, watching as a light moved through the upstairs apartment. His silhouette appeared briefly against the blinds, the same tall frame I had noticed standing at the back of my wife's funeral. I did not approach him that night. Instead, I returned home and emptied the contents of the second phone onto my laptop, creating a digital archive of their relationship. Each message, each photograph, each planned rendezvous carefully documented and timestamped. The methodical process brought an unexpected calm, transforming overwhelming emotion into concrete evidence. This wasn't just heartbreak, it was a mystery I could solve, a history I could document. The man who drove back to an empty house that night was not the same one who had stood beside his wife's casket. That man had been mourning a shared future suddenly erased. This man was mourning a past that had never truly existed. 2 weeks after the funeral, I found myself standing outside Adrian Holt's photography studio during business hours. The elegant sign above the door read "Holt Perspectives" in minimalist lettering. Through the large windows, I could see him working with a client, adjusting lighting equipment around a young woman seated on a stool. My presence on the sidewalk eventually caught his attention, and recognition flickered across his face. He excused himself from his client and approached the door, opening it with cautious curiosity. "Can I help you?" Adrian asked, though his eyes suggested he already knew exactly who I was. "I think we should talk," I replied, maintaining composure despite the thundering in my chest. "About Mara." Adrian glanced back at his waiting client before nodding. "Give me 15 minutes to finish this session." His voice carried the practiced smoothness of someone accustomed to navigating uncomfortable situations. The 15 minutes stretched into 30 as I waited outside, watching pedestrians pass by, oblivious to the collision of worlds about to happen within those walls. When the client finally departed, Adrian beckoned me inside and locked the door behind us, flipping the sign to closed. "I wondered if you would find me," he admitted, leading me through the main studio space toward a back office. The walls were lined with his photographs, landscapes, portraits, and among them, several unmistakable images of Mara. In one, she gazed out a window, her profile illuminated by sunlight, wearing an expression of contemplative yearning I had never seen at home. "She never mentioned you were a photographer," I observed, pausing before the largest portrait. Strange thing to omit about her husband of 12 years. Adrian poured 2 glasses of water from a pitcher on his desk, offering one to me. "Mara said you weren't interested in her artistic pursuits. That you were supportive but distant." He gestured toward a chair. "She spoke about you respectfully, if that matters." "It doesn't," I responded, setting the untouched water on his desk before pulling out the second phone. "What matters is understanding why my wife needed an entirely separate device dedicated to communicating with you." Adrian's expression shifted from defensive to resigned as I placed the phone between us. "She was afraid of hurting you prematurely. Mara wanted certainty before disrupting your life." "Certainty about what?" The question emerged more forcefully than intended, echoing against the exposed brick walls. About whether what we had was substantial enough to build a life upon, Adrian answered with frustrating sincerity. She struggled with the decision every day. Your history together weighed heavily on her. Not heavily enough, I countered, pointing toward the photographs surrounding us. These aren't impulsive snapshots, Adrian. These are carefully composed moments. How long were you planning this gallery of my wife? Adrian ran a hand through his hair, a gesture reminiscent of Mara's own nervous habit. The exhibition was scheduled for January. Transitions was the working title. Mara had agreed to be the central subject, her journey from constraint to creative freedom. The implication struck with precision. I was the constraint she had been shedding. A dull anger spread through me, somehow more potent than explosive rage would have been. She was preparing to leave after Christmas, Adrian continued, his confidence returning. She wanted one last holiday with you before beginning honestly. It wasn't malicious, Elias. She respected what you built together. You speak about respect while planning to document the dissolution of my marriage through your art. The calm in my voice surprised even me. Did you love her, or was she simply your muse? I loved her more in 2 months than you did in a decade, Adrian declared, the rehearsed quality of the line suggesting he had been waiting to deliver it. She needed passion, spontaneity, someone who saw her completely. When was the last time you truly saw her, Elias? I stood, having heard enough. The difference between us, Adrian, is that I never claimed to see all of her. I simply promised to stay regardless of what I saw. I moved toward the door before turning back. She died still wearing my ring, still sleeping in our bed. Remember that when you're romanticizing what might have been. The conversation with Adrian lingered in my mind for days afterward, his words echoing through our empty house where Mara's absence now felt less like a void and more like an explanation. The history teacher in me recognized a familiar pattern: how civilizations crumble not from external forces but from internal decay, foundations weaken long before the walls finally collapse. Our marriage had been eroding beneath the surface while I maintained the facade, blissfully unaware of the structural damage. After a week of sleepless nights and aimless days moving through the routines of a life that no longer fit, inspiration struck while grading essays about historical figures whose legacies had been revised by time and perspective. Mara had curated her public image carefully, the devoted wife to our friends, the free spirit to her artistic circle, the passionate lover to Adrian. Perhaps the most fitting response was not to shatter these images but to connect them, creating a complete portrait only visible when all fragments were assembled. My laptop became command central as I crafted an anonymous blog titled The Widow's Truth. The first entry flowed from my fingers with surprising ease. When the woman I loved died, I mourned a person who never truly existed. Instead, she lived as separate selves for separate audiences, compartmentalizing her heart with surgical precision. This is not a story of villains, but of fractured identity, the casualties left behind when someone refuses to integrate their many selves. Carefully selected text messages appeared next, with names removed but emotional content preserved. Adrian's photographs followed, not the intimate ones that would have humiliated her memory, but the artistic ones showing her transformation over their months together, the visual evidence of her emotional departure from our marriage. Each image credited with just enough ambiguity for plausible deniability while ensuring those who knew him would recognize the style immediately. The post concluded with scanned pages from Mara's personal journal, discovered in her studio drawer, entries revealing her internal struggle, her compartmentalized affections, her plans for escape. I love E for the foundation he provided, but I cannot build my future on stability alone, she had written 3 weeks before her death. I seized the fire in me that he tried to warm himself by without ever stoking the flames. I hesitated before publishing, questioning whether this digital memorial would bring closure or merely spread my private pain into public consciousness. The decision crystallized when Sarah called, her voice tentative over the phone. Adrian is planning an exhibition of his work with Mara as the centerpiece. He's calling it Ephemeral Muse now. Opening night is next month. The blog post went live that evening. Initially, it garnered modest attention, shared among literary circles who appreciated its exploration of identity and betrayal without recognizing its subjects. Then Mara's cousin, always quick to spot connections, recognized her initials and certain details. The revelation spread through whispered conversations and concerned messages, eventually reaching the local arts community where Adrian had begun promoting his upcoming exhibition. Gallery owners contacted him with polite withdrawals. The timing seems insensitive, they explained, referring to both Mara's recent death and the emerging questions about their relationship. Financial backers reconsidered their support, uncomfortable with the potential controversy. Adrian's carefully constructed narrative of artistic inspiration transformed overnight into whispers of exploitation. 1 week after publishing, I received an email from an address I didn't recognize. "You've destroyed everything she would have wanted. Her legacy deserved better than your bitterness." No signature, but Adrian's wounded pride resonated in every word. I drafted multiple responses before settling on simplicity. Her legacy was already divided. I merely collected the pieces. After sending it, I closed the laptop and returned to packing Mara's belongings, a task that now felt less like preserving memories and more like archiving artifacts from a historical figure whose complete story was finally emerging, complicated and human and utterly imperfect. The first snow of winter arrived exactly 1 month after Mara's funeral, transforming the cemetery into a peaceful landscape of white-draped monuments and evergreens bowing under crystalline weight. I had avoided visiting her grave since the burial, unable to reconcile the woman commemorated on the headstone with the complex reality I had uncovered. Today felt different, however. The school had closed for the weather, granting me an unexpected day of solitude, and something pulled me toward this final reckoning. Her headstone stood modest among more elaborate memorials, exactly as we had once discussed during a long-ago conversation about mortality. Nothing grandiose, she had insisted while we walked through the same cemetery years earlier. Just my name, the dates, and perhaps a single line that matters. We had settled on beloved wife, daughter, and creator, words that now seemed simultaneously true and incomplete. The snow crunched beneath my boots as I approached, carrying a small box containing the items I had come to leave behind. Brushing accumulated snowflakes from the smooth granite surface, I placed a thermos of coffee beside me and poured a steaming cup, the aroma rising between us like an offering. "I brought something for you," I began, my voice sounding strange in the muffled quiet of the snow-covered grounds. "Everything Adrian ever captured of you. All the photographs, including the ones he never published. The ones that show who you really were with him." I placed a flash drive at the base of the stone. "You wanted to be seen. Now you are, completely and honestly." Opening my copy of the journal I had found in her studio, I flipped through pages filled with her distinctive handwriting. Certain entries had become familiar through repeated reading, like lines from a favorite poem memorized through repetition. "E deserves someone who loves him completely, not fractionally," she had written 2 months before her death. "My guilt isn't about betraying him but about not being brave enough to release him from a half-love he doesn't know he's receiving." Closing the journal, I traced my fingers over the engraved letters of her name. "I wish you had told me," I continued, watching my breath crystallize in the cold air. "Not about Adrian specifically, but about your dissatisfaction. About feeling unfulfilled. We could have addressed it together, or separated with dignity rather than deception." Wind whispered through the bare branches overhead, sending a cascade of snow from an overhanging bough. I waited for the emotion to overtake me, anger, grief, resentment, but instead found a surprising calm settling within my chest. The revelation of her affair had initially felt like a second death, the murder of our shared history, but time had transformed that perspective. "The strangest part is that I understand now," I admitted, pouring more coffee from the thermos. "Not your methods, but your motivation. You needed passion and spontaneity, I offered stability and consistency. We were answering different questions for each other without realizing it." Reaching into my pocket, I withdrew her wedding ring, which the funeral home had returned to me along with her other personal effects. The platinum band caught the winter sunlight, throwing fractured rainbows across the snow. "I'm keeping my ring," I told her, "not as a monument to what we lost but as a reminder of what I learned. Love isn't possession, it's bearing witness to another's journey, even when that journey leads away from you." I placed her ring beside the flash drive, completing the small collection of artifacts at the base of her headstone. Rising to my feet, I brushed snow from my coat and took one last look at the grave of the woman who had been my wife, my betrayer, and ultimately, my greatest teacher. "Goodbye, Mara," I said finally. "May your afterlife offer the integration your life couldn't achieve." With that benediction complete, I turned and walked away, leaving behind not just the physical reminders of our fractured marriage but also the weight of resentment I had carried since discovering her duplicity. Spring arrived in New England with its customary temperamental shifts between lingering cold and promising warmth, much like my own emotional landscape in the months following my cemetery visit. The school year progressed with predictable milestones, midterms, parent conferences, the annual field trip to Boston's historical sites, providing the framework of normalcy my life required while deeper transformations occurred beneath the surface. My anonymous blog had evolved from its initial purpose into something more meaningful, attracting readers who connected with themes of identity, grief, and personal reinvention. Comments arrived daily from people navigating their own relationship complexities, finding solace in the transparent examination of a marriage that existed in multiple realities simultaneously. Literary agents began reaching out, suggesting the material might resonate as a memoir. Adrian's exhibition never materialized, his spotlight redirected elsewhere as the art community's attention shifted to emerging talents. We encountered each other once at a coffee shop downtown, exchanging brief acknowledging nods before continuing on separate paths. The animosity that once fueled my revenge had dissipated into something resembling mutual recognition of our shared connection to a woman neither of us had fully known. The principal called me into her office one April afternoon as students filed out for spring break. "The English department has an interesting proposal," she began, gesturing toward the chair across from her desk. "They're launching a creative writing elective next fall and wondered if you'd consider teaching one section. Your online writing has garnered quite a following among faculty." Surprised that my colleagues had discovered the connection between myself and the anonymous blog, I considered the offer carefully. "History has always been my focus," I responded, though the possibility intrigued me more than expected. "Perhaps that's precisely why you'd bring a valuable perspective," she suggested. "Examining narrative as both personal truth and historical record. Besides, your students consistently praise your ability to make the past feel relevant to their lives." That evening, I began drafting an outline for a manuscript tentatively titled Loving a Ghost, weaving historical perspectives on grief and identity throughout my personal narrative. The writing flowed with surprising ease, chapters forming around central questions rather than chronological events. What constitutes betrayal? How do we reconcile contradictory truths about those we love? Can posthumous discoveries rewrite a shared history? Sarah visited during this period of transformation, bringing dinner and cautious friendship. "You seem different," she observed as we sat on the porch watching neighborhood children play in the lengthening evening light. "More presence somehow." "I finally stopped looking for the definitive version of Mara," I explained, realizing the truth as the words emerged. She existed in fragments, like most of us do. The mistake was believing any single fragment represented the whole. My decision crystallized during those spring months. The house would be sold. My teaching career continued in a coastal Maine town where a position had opened at a well-regarded preparatory school. The memoir manuscript, nearly complete, had secured interest from several publishers impressed by its unflinching examination of posthumous discovery and emotional evolution. Boxes filled the hallway on my final evening in the home Mara and I had shared, each labeled for its destination, storage, donation, new residence. Among my essential possessions traveled the wedding ring I still wore, not as a symbol of lingering attachment but as acknowledgement of formative experience. The journey through grief and betrayal had transformed me from a man defined by routine to one embracing uncertainty. The last item packed was a framed photograph of Mara, not one of Adrian's artistic compositions, but a simple candid from our 3rd anniversary, her smile unguarded and genuine. Looking at it now, I recognized both the woman I had loved and the stranger she had become, accepting both as equally real. The compartmentalization that had defined her life had ultimately led to my own integration, teaching me that truth rarely exists in absolutes but rather in the complicated spaces between contradicting realities.